$20,000?
You've got to believe with the new West Hall, with the new West Hall, I'm still not used to saying that, they must have just poured vast amounts of money into infrastructure. So it's got to be tied with fiber to a central office somewhere just massively. So if they can just distribute from the new West Hall out to the other halls with even short run fiber or something like that, you would believe they'd have to be able to get a lot of connectivity.
Hey, Guy, have you played with this plugin from BirdDog?
Is it the Dyno or what? I don't. Your screen's really small.
They won some award.
I haven't played with it. If it's the new Dyno NDI monitoring app, I haven't played with it yet.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
That's cool. Yeah, I need to install it. As long as it's just monitoring, I'm always a little weary of install. I've installed some stuff that wasn't ready to fly. That
yeah, if it's not from Rogue Amoeba, it usually isn't allowed anywhere near my audio chain without a lot of testing.
Well, this is just to monitor performance, so it should just be monitoring and not actually doing anything. But it's monitoring, just the data rate. So there's different flavors of NDI, so it should be able to tell you if it's full NDI or NDIH, or you can tell just by the data rate, and it should be able to also tell you if there's an alpha channel, how many channels of audio, and then just the frame rate and the video size.
How much less is HX in throughput than standard NDI?
At 1080, you're getting like a tenth, so it's just a SIP. Yeah, it's like 120 megabit for full, and then like 12 for HX.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah, you could squeeze a lot more. So on a 1 gigabit NIC, you'd be able to squeeze like 8 channels at full. That's really pushing it. If you like if you had a vMix machine or something, you want to cut 8 feeds, it's really pushing it over 1. But HX, you could load a couple more. So a lot of people, if they're doing like PowerPoint pulls, they'll just do them with the screen capture HX app. So there's 2 screen capture apps, and they'll just SIP with the HX, because there's not a whole lot usually changing in those feeds. But if you're like a gamer, some of these guys are using NDI for esports, and they're pulling in a high frame rate game, so they want full resolution, and it looks better. Full NDI looks amazing. Like the BirdDog cameras, they're different in that regard. So you get the full meal deal. You get 10-bit color instead of the squashed 8-bit, and just 8-bit versus 10-bit. You can visually see it on a BirdDog versus like a PTZ Optics. It's NDI HX.
The full meal deal. Sound like a Happy Meal guy?
The full meal deal. Yeah. When you see the difference, I mean, that's one of the benefits of going to NAB is when you see, if they'll put it up side by side, you can see it.
I'm so hungry now. Just want to know what full meal means. I mean, is it like American full meal, or is it like French full meal, which is very...
It's very, very quiet.
Be very, very quiet. Hunting rabbit. This is just for Mitchell. Mitchell and Keenan. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is something we want to spend a little more time on, and that today we're going to talk about Unreal Engine. Unreal 5 is out. Nick Jushchyshyn from Drexel University is going to be here. He's going to be walking us through what the new things are and answering your questions. So definitely jump in and let us know what you need. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about participant prep. So how do we get people ready for these Zoom events? And so we'll be walking through that tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. And if you want to find out more, again, what we do, the full schedule is at officehours.global. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into the questions. Let's take it away, Bill.
Thank you, Alex. The first one comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, and he says, what do you like for a terminal program? And he specifies Mac, PC, and Linux. And have you tried Warp, the, quote, terminal for the 21st century?
Yeah, the one that I really like is called Terminal. So it comes with the computer. So I have to admit, this is not something that I like to, I have played with a couple of things here. This is not something I like to adjust. I like it to look the same on every computer that I go into, no matter where I go. If I'm opening the terminal, something's usually like I have to do something and I don't want it to be different. I don't want to adjust to something. If I want to be able to go to any Mac or Linux or whatever and open it up, but I haven't wanted to change this that much. So I think Warp's interesting. I did look at it because of the question, but I was like, I don't think I would install that. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I like tweaking things, but I've never found anything that I like more than just making Terminal the way that I want it to be.
Next question.
Next one comes from Guy Cochran in Seattle, and Guy says, what could we do that would make the Cinegear show a groundbreaking success?
So getting one done and progressing it would be great. But I think that we have 18 people that have signed up so far. So, and by the way, if you go into Discord, you'll see a link, and we'll put it back into the list here in Mukana. But and we'll send it out the email. I didn't get it out into the email this morning. But we're looking for people who are interested in both NAMM and Cinegear. They're right next to each other, and we will have a WWC project as well. So that week is going to be really busy. As far as Cinegear goes, I think that, right now, I think looking at people signing up, I think there's an opportunity for us to probably have potentially 2 teams that are able to kind of bounce around. We'll look at what we want to do. I really think that we could do one main team and then smaller teams that are much lighter, that are moving around. But I think that, I think the big thing is just tightening up all the things that we're doing: clean audio, clean video, kind of solidly jumping through things. I don't know if that would break a lot of ground, because almost nobody else has done. No one will have done what we did, at Cinegear if all we do is dot our T's and cross our I's, or cross our T's and dot our I's. If all we do is that, it'll be probably the best broadcast that's ever been done from Cinegear. Like we just have to know that we as a group don't need to evolve very fast, because having an online gallery talking about this, having people watching the show and asking questions of vendors. I do think we have to figure out a way to get the questions to the vendors really, really fast. I think some things that I'd love to stretch on is us as panelists being able to ask questions directly from Zoom through a speaker on at the in the camera. So that would be groundbreaking. Being able to get the questions right to them, and maybe it's one of us reading it to that person, or it's the person on the ground reading those to them. But being able to do that really, really fast, I think, would be groundbreaking, because it would really bring a whole new level of interactivity. Because potentially for Cinegear, it could be like we would be essentially effectively a couple hundred people walking up to your booth and talking to you for a second, and then moving on to the next booth. So it's a really great opportunity for the vendors as well. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think we're already a lot of this idea, and congratulations to everybody on the back end who created this and put it in for Alex to bring the spark that got it all together. A lot of success. The one thing that I noticed,
Noah brought it.
No, I'm sorry.
I don't take any credit for that. This was Noah's idea to kind of pull this forward, and
well, it's
and
always been
teamwork.
Everybody, the infrastructure had to be there, and that's what Alex has helped us build through the course. Anyway, all that aside, to me, there were just a couple of little things. It's hard to control. The booth presenters know what they want to talk about. They've been given a list of here are the top 5 things of this. So they do tend to run on a little bit. And our format of question and answer, I don't know how to make it easier to break in and get the questions that we rely on that really go beyond the canned presentations. But the way however we work that out so that there is a way for more interactivity would be, I think, fabulous. But outside of a few little things like that, it's not something that has to be fixed too much.
I think that the big thing is that, again, I'm probably more forceful as someone who's done a bunch of these, where I do the intro of the booth of like, this is what makes it interesting. And then I go, and we've got some questions from the audience, and immediately the person at the booth is there to answer questions, not to present. I mean, we would probably have our people present what's interesting about that booth and talk a little bit about it. There might be a couple of questions that we have for them, but we wouldn't really have them present as much as just answer questions from us and then answer questions from the audience. But I think that that's the easiest way to keep that tight. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunity here as far as looks. I mean, looking just at like ESPN and some of these sports shows where they'll have like 4 or 5 boxes and then a big centerpiece, like, so the play is going on in the middle, but you have like a quadrant of little squares in the corners, and there's just cool things we could do with 4K if we have like Anchor 1, Anchor 2, and then maybe a couple other people that are knowledgeable in audio or something specific that's Cine lenses or things like that, because that show the difference between what we saw indoors at the Las Vegas Convention Center in Cinegear is that it's predominantly an outdoor show. So for those of you who haven't been there, it's stages, so it's on the Paramount lot, and you can go inside some of the stages. And so
I think it's LACC this year.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think I looked because I was surprised. I thought the exact same thing that you were talking about. I think that Cinegear is, if we look at it, I believe that it's Cinegear Expo. I know we're kind of, it's, sorry, we're people.
I
are
haven't done
watching
anything
here.
in the LACC, but is it big enough to get all those like huge jibs and things that are such a big part of Cinegear? Because they've got lots of big iron.
Yeah, it's big. So you can do anything you want. LACC.
Okay.
So yeah, it's LACC this year. So I think they're going to be in that upper. I don't know. It could still have a bunch of stuff outside, but they could do it up the stairs, up the main stairs there, and into that area. I think that's what I'm going to guess that we're gonna see there. But they also could be in the lower kind of eating area for most other things, but in that area under the escalators. And so anyway, I think that there's we'll figure that out, and it looks like we have enough people that we can talk about it. What I will say is that I definitely think that we should look at aggressive things. We just want to make sure that as we plan both NAMM, Cinegear, WWDC all happening at the same time, potentially InfoWorld as well, or InfoComm or whatever is happening at the same time as well, that we just make sure that what we really need to do is make sure we do everything well. Like that's I think that we did it like on an NAB, lots of holes, that it was incredible and it was a huge step forward. But tightening all the video and the audio and the lighting and just a general flow would be a huge step forward. And then if we can add a couple little things with graphics, that's great. But I think we want to make sure that I completely agree with you, Guy, though, that we can do a lot with extra data. And like what would be kind of cool also is to have potentially we get graphics that are going to that booth. So here's the thing that they're showing, and we have it like rotating, or we have some kind of whatever that's next to it while we're doing picture in picture. And, that kind of thing could really up the game as well. But go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm thinking a little OH branding would help too. I mean, if we go into a booth, if our crew is all wearing the same color shirt or doing something to call attention to ourselves, I think people are sort of catching on what office hours is about. Might make it easier unless you have a PA, pre-interviewing, but that would be cool. And I also like your idea about the speaker, Alex. That worked well for David Letterman, so I'd like to see us do it.
I will definitely make shirts. We made shirts before for Pixel Core, and they were very popular. So we'll definitely make shirts for crew swag is a good thing. Go ahead, Eric.
Guy got me thinking that maybe like ESPN has those rotating names, like here's what's upcoming in the next segment. There's going to be these 3 booths, so people can kind of track ahead of time. Oh, I want to be here in 5 minutes when they talk to that booth.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So keep thinking about it. We'll probably do some after hours meetings starting next week. I'm going to talk to Noah about I think we're going to still see, he's going to be an integral part of this whole process. So we'll talk to Noah about that and start setting up meetings. Though I was talking to Noah about it a couple of days ago. So we'll start setting up meetings where we can start organizing who's going to do what and start to kind of get ahead of it as, we've got a little bit of time. As these kind of progress, I have a feeling that, first it was 2 weeks, now it's 6 weeks. Pretty soon it'll be like 3 months. Like for IBC, we'll start, in July, to figure that out. All right, next question.
Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware says, many of us still edit under supervision. A client, how many still edit under supervision with the client versus solo editing?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I have my editing system now in my condo. Here it is. It lives here, so it's not client friendly so much. But the only time that I'm supervised is if I'm doing something. I just recently did a hernia operation video, and there's some technical stuff that it required the doctor be there to tell me, hey, cut to that, do this, do whatever. But most of the time, I'm enjoying the fact that I can go down, have a snack, and come back up, no pressure. And it's a different lifestyle.
Okay, Bill,
I'm resisting all urges to pun right now.
Go ahead, Bill.
I've done, since 10 years ago, I've always been home-based, and I just set up a camera, a webcam basically over my shoulder if I'm going to do something that's guided and make sure I can see them through Zoom. And I've done a lot of sessions that way. It's really not that much different. Some people still want to come and get craft services or go out to lunch and stuff like that, but very few.
I haven't had a client in the edit room for a decade. Next question.
Todd Davis in Hutchinson, Kansas. I have a company coming in today to give a recommendation on a fixed sound system for a basketball gym turned into a fire department training auditorium. Talent and videos on a 2-foot tall stage build at the end. Any recommendations on speakers, amps, mixers, and mics?
I go with Jason.
I will defer to Bill on those specific items, but Guy helped me out quite a bit with a really tricky build in a law firm and completely helped me talk the client into what's the name of the sound treatment, Guy? That's the first place my head went when I'm thinking gymnasium turns into something where you need to be heard, and absolutely worth it. So I would think about
F-Sorb is the name of the company, like RLX, F and then SORB, F-Sorb.
F-Sorb. So I would start thinking about sound insulation and I'm sorry, not insulation, sound treatment before you go into anything else.
Literally the first thing I thought of as well is that you can have any speakers you want, but sound treatment's going to be a big deal. I go with Bill.
Yes, most gymnasiums are huge, hard surface, regular dimension boxes. They are horrible for sound. And the engineers who do stadium things like that have a lot of specific techniques to make things intelligible. You're not going to probably have the advantage that most stadiums do of a crowd, which forms human absorption. So managing echo, slapback, reverb is going to be your number one thing, and it just takes somebody who really knows what they're doing. So I would look for consultants who can help you with that. This is not going to be a small task. You can do it. I mean, you can turn a facility like that into something that's decent for filming, but it's not the simplest process in the world.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
More speakers equal better coverage and lower volume. So use speakers distributed, and it'll cut down on the volume, which ends up being echoed all over the place. And if I was picking speakers, my first choice, since you didn't mention a budget, would be Meyer, maybe second choice Community.
Yeah, it depends on, and the mics, it depends on what you're trying to do training. It sounds like if they're doing training, oftentimes you're going to want headset mics. So, those can be anything from a Countryman or a DPA. There's a lot of ones that are less expensive than that could also work as well. Just depends on how you want them to look, but those can help a lot. I still think that for a basic mix, I still really like the X32s as far as price performance. It kind of gets you something you can do almost anything with down the road for what you're doing. So I would, and for me, I lean generally towards an X32 with a rack mount so that I can just put an X Touch somewhere and just have it connected over Ethernet. So just something to think about there. Next question.
Nick Batt out of the UK says, need a solution for ingesting multiple SD cards concurrently, renaming and copying to SSD. Needs to have zero interactivity, just feed them in and work with a multi-card reader so that while one is copying, another can be inserted.
Go ahead, Nick.
There's a under the radar tool from a company called CameraBits, and the tool is called Photo Mechanic. It's actually built up for sports photojournalists to do exactly this. And you can actually have it, rename files as they come in, have them routed to specific directories. And in the case of photos, it'll actually update metadata as those come in. If it's video files, it'll ingest those as well. And you can still use the renaming features and such. But I love Photo Mechanic because it's a very lightweight and very automated tool.
And does it do video? Does it do, it's...
it can handle it'll take all the files from the cards as they come in, and it recognizes video. I don't believe that it manipulates the metadata of video the way it can access the EXIF data in raw imagery and from photo cameras, but it will handle video absolutely.
Yeah, it's a great app. I've just never used it for video. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, Photomechanics' superpower is how quickly it can turn out a decent, RAW, so you can see what you're looking at. And yeah, that's a great choice. I was thinking about a video workflow, and from the makers of from Edit Ready is an app called Hedge that early in Office Hours season 0.5, we actually got a great presentation from the designer. I would look at hedge.video, and I think it'll do what you need.
Yeah, I was going to mention Hedge as well. And there's also ShotPut is another one. Go ahead, Mitchell.
OWC makes a lot of products that allow for workflows similar to that. I don't know a specific one off the top of my head, but they've got it covered.
Yep, go ahead, Bill.
Concur. ShotPut Pro and Hedge are the two. I've used Hedge more than ShotPut Pro. Those are the ones specifically designed to do this.
So I think 3 pretty good options there. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is up next. What's a good source for hints and tips on using the Mac and for keyboard shortcuts?
Go ahead, Kenneth.
I find a nice little website called macmost.com. Gary Rosenzweig runs it. It's fairly detailed and is able to be responsive to the questions of the users as well. He's got a number of videos there. He goes everywhere from the simplest things like, why can't I do so-and-so? I come from a PC. And I can't find that button on my Mac, into some fairly detailed arrangements. He also has a number of courses that are available. Seems like an all-around good guy, and he does actually answer the communications that you have with him.
Jason.
Paul, your brain may work differently than mine, but I kid you not, I'm not being glib. The best way to learn, quickly getting around a Mac is Command Space Bar for all of your launches and searches and what have you. That is just the best keystroke there is. And then just look at the menus for the stuff you do a lot. It's right there.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I was going to add on to MacMost. I'd say they are fantastic, but also in the podcast realm, Mac Power Users podcast, as well as the Automators. And David Sparks does both. Rosemary Orchard is his co-host on the Automators. Those are fantastic tools for learning to really get the most out of the Mac.
The way I learn shortcuts for everything is that I just don't let myself use the menu. I go up, if I see a shortcut there, I will then I look at the shortcut and then I do the shortcut. and if I use that tool a lot, I do the shortcut a lot. And before I know it, I know the shortcut. That's just how I organically learn the shortcuts rather than trying to do any studying. I just do it organically. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas comes right back with any recommendations for a low-cost, waterproof bone conduction headset.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I don't know if I would totally recommend these. There was somebody on the panel, I think it was Leo Mendel earlier in the year that recommended these, and so I bought them. These are the Aftershocks bone conduction. I don't know if they're beyond just sweat proof. I've been using them on my treadmill. I don't like the sound compared to my AirPod Pro, so I've pretty much shelved them. I mean, they sit there. I keep them charged, and I'll use them every once in a while. I do like that they're you can still hear the room, which is super nice. So if you do need to hear what's going on around you, they're super cool for that. But I just don't love the sound. I love good sound, and so these are not that. If you appreciate your music and want to hear nuances, these will not do that for you. But they will let you hear, dialogue pure and clean.
Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
The church that I work with, I have 3 members that are actually using the shockwaves, and they are extremely happy with them, and they tend to get a little excited and move around quite a bit. So the shockwaves are helpful and beneficial to them.
Next question.
Mitchell Hill, Wilmington, Delaware is right back with wondering why some Zoom audio seems to shift from day to day on office hours.
I'm not sure. What are you talking about, sync, or are you talking about
volume? We work a lot on keeping the volume consistent.
It's the closest I've seen in any Zoom. So I don't, I think everyone's changing their system a little bit. I don't think it's overall changing in Zoom. I think that I think that we see a little bit of variance, but it's only by a very small number of dBs compared to most meetings that I'm in. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I also think there's a lot of variability in what's coming in. We do our best to get a standard, but we're always there's an imprecise system for doing this. I also just notice it is human nature that you come in to do a mic check and you do it kind of at one level of energy, and then depending on what happens during the show and whether you're sure or unsure of your answer or whatever, we project a lot differently. And in trying to keep a robust dynamic range from the low end to the high end in our chain, that means that the performance can vary a little bit. And I've seen myself getting too excited in the middle of something and had to mentally pull back because I know I'm getting too loud. And the opposite, I'm just low energy today. I need to come up a little.
I mean, I find that it's rare for people. It's rare for us to vary much more than, about -18 to -25, which it seems like a large range, but that's much tighter than I experience almost anywhere else. So I think that, I think that's going to be I think we always have to look at the precision of the tool, and I think the precision of human beings with their own systems going into a online tool, that's probably about as precise as we're going to get. Next question.
Roy Myers in Bel Air, Maryland says, what's your favorite text editor on the Mac? TextEdit's Zoom seems to be broken. I can't easily zoom in and then get the view properly framed. The left edge of the text moves out of your viewport.
Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say there's probably two. Ulysses is a really good text editor if you're actually doing writing, like blogging, and they're making it easier now to directly publish your blogs from Ulysses. But I would also suggest Drafts. Drafts is kind of my starting point, creating a note, and then you can actually have a lot of automations out of Drafts to almost any application in your Mac.
Go ahead, Jason.
Inevitably, it just depends on what you like. But I'd say my top two, not even a close one. BB Edit is by far the number one. And then Panic. Panic made a really nice one called Coda.
Next question.
Next one comes from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. And he says, does latency through a decimator vary depending on the type of scaling and conversion being used? Do heavier conversions cause higher lag?
Go, Jason.
Not in my experience. In general, I find it's rare that you lose more than a frame, and if so, you're really doing something else wrong.
Yeah, I think that if you turn the processing on, if you pass it straight through without any scaling, it is low latency. And if you put anything on it, I think you just lose the standard latency, which feels to me like a couple of frames, when it goes through the process. And I haven't measured it. Next question.
Tony Mobley, Noonan, Georgia, up next. He says, as the COVID-19 numbers keep creeping up, is there a proactive plan to protect the crews on the ground for the future live streaming office hours events?
I think that for folks that are doing this, they're going to have to decide whether it's a risk that they're willing to take. They're going to go out to a group of people. I think that we're past a lot of the tools that we were using in the past. I don't see anybody that I'm working with seeing any kind of major surge again. Like they're not. I think that a lot of people think that we're kind of through that. So people are still going to get it. I think that we should make sure that everyone takes at least a rapid test before they go, just to make sure we're not passing it between the crew. I think we want to have. I think what we've learned from COVID is that it's basic procedures like cleaning things all the time and making sure that we're handing things and not touching them all the time is probably good all around. So many people have noticed that they haven't been sick by anything for a long time because they're not passing as many germs back and forth. But I think that it's going to be, I think that if you go to something like a NAM or those kinds of things, you have to take that into account because no one's going to be paying attention to anything. Like, at this point, I mean, we don't see that with any of the, I don't know what people saw at NAB, but I don't see anybody paying any real attention to those processes anymore. I mean, in production, we are definitely getting people tested. We're still, when we're doing like big productions or something like that, when we're messing around on the stage, we're just careful. When we're doing productions, we're paying, we oftentimes have COVID officers and so on and so forth there. So it's just a matter of where we're going. But I think that even that, we're looking at each production as to whether the cost makes sense to do a COVID officer and materials, because it's just we don't see any significant numbers. They're creeping up, but I don't think that we're gonna. I mean, I could be surprised, but I think that we're kind of through the pipe. It's gonna be like the flu now, like a little bit heavier than the flu is my guess. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, we just also, the industry and the medical profession has learned so much about it. I remember when we all were just freaked out about touching anything and thinking that it was surface transmission dependent. And it turned out that it was more aerosolized. And these things have large spaces and there's a lot of air handling. So I think what I'm paying attention to is now that we're done with something like NAB, is there any anecdotal evidence that that was a transmission vector? In the early days, those kind of things did happen and we heard about that. But I'm getting a little more confident as time goes by that people now understand enough about this to be able to mitigate risk a little bit.
And we're still seeing anytime you get a bunch of people together. I had some friends that have gone to weddings in the last 3 weeks because it's the spring, and in all of them, there's a small cluster of people that got COVID. like it's kind of happening. So I think it's a real risk. I think if people have any kind of risk factors, they should probably take it into account. But the biggest thing that is really overwhelming is tends to be the impact on hospitals. And right now the hospitals are not at capacity, not anywhere near it. I mean, I don't think we see any hospitals being overwhelmed at this point. That's the real thing that you pay a lot of attention to. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Alex, you mentioned that most musicians noodle around on the piano or guitar putting ideas together before building said idea into a full song. What skills are necessary to be able to build ideas rapidly off the cuff?
Go ahead, Nick.
It's one thing I would say is build your vocabulary, right? So just like a writer might be studying words and phrases and all different languages, the same would be true of a musician, studying different styles of music and learning the chord progressions, the melodies, and all those kinds of things. Just as you play them and practice them on your own, those other pieces, you develop some muscle memory. And then when your own ideas start to flow, you can kind of draw on that vocabulary to create your own.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'll answer as best I can as a drummer who does exactly this in front of pianos and guitars and whatever I have. I would say root, third, fifth progressions, just turn that into muscle memory and then try to go major and then minor and find keys you like and then just play.
Next question.
Scott Jeff in Jackson, Tennessee is up next. He says, I'm starting as the director of marketing on a small or low budget higher ed team in a few weeks. Do you have any recommendations for improving search engine optimization and starting a content marketing plan?
Rupert?
I would say that, SEO content is king. You've got to have helpful, useful content that people are going to find interesting and want to read and link to and cite and refer to others. But ultimately, I think if you just follow it would also be a good idea to follow the best practice for accessibility on any content management strategy, SEO, or website design. And if you do that, I think you'll be making your site, your content inherently nicely machine readable, which will ultimately help your SEO.
And I think SEO is important. I think that content marketing is really important. So, and it's really a matter of looking at what your market needs. So how do you serve the market that you're in with real content and talk about your product as little as possible? So it's really about giving people information and incidentally or happen to have something of your product being used as the function of how you're showing it, or talking about it in passing. I think the biggest mistake people make with content marketing is they make it all about their brand. I think DVE Store is actually a really good example of a lot of content the guy just puts up there that is really about the products. It's about the thing. It's not, it happens to be on their website. It happens to do those things, but it's not something that's a big commercial for DVE Store. It's just serving the market. And so I think that's a great example that you can look at for how to build those videos and make something that's actually useful. It gets a lot of views. People will come and look at that stuff because it's useful, and they don't feel like they're being marketed to. Next question.
Rupert McRae is up next from Dallas, Texas, who was just speaking. He says, any thoughts on using either EtherCon cables and connectors for Ethernet networks, and or any tips for handing off or converting these connections into regular ports, like to a network switch?
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh boy, is this annoying. Kind of the dirty little secret of Cat 7a is that the pins are actually too close to sustain data rates, and you have to get this goofy converter. So long story short, try to avoid it if you can, and if not, get a good patch panel.
Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, and he says, how about an office hours watch party for the producers?
I guess for the, I don't know exactly what we would do with that. I guess the best way to see the behind the scenes would be to volunteer to be part of the crew that's working on the show in the background, and you can kind of see how that all works. I think that we're not ready to subdivide the viewership yet into starting to create new verticals, but we may somewhere in the future. Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas, is right back again with, what are your favorite WordPress themes and plugins?
I don't know. I don't know if we have a lot of folks here that are facile enough with WordPress. Go ahead, Jason.
I gotta say it. Don't use WordPress plugins. They are kind of the worst part of WordPress. There, I said it.
Nick.
I was going to say I use it's more of a theme called Divi, which is a tool set. It actually allows you to do what you see is what you get design of your posts and pages, and then it has its own themes underlying it. So I would definitely take a look at Divi, D-I-V-I, from Elegant Themes. Not sponsored at all. It's just something I've been using for years and just absolutely love it.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, we talk a lot about North American, Asian, and European countries, but what have your experiences been with production in the Middle East, Dubai, for example?
The production that we've worked on in the Middle East has been kind of an interesting range of incredible budgets and then sometimes not incredible budgets. And it just depends on who's paying for it and what they're looking for. At some point, what we find is that in the Middle East, there's a fair amount of that nothing can go wrong. It has to be the absolute best in the world, and we'll pay whatever it costs to do it. And then on the other side of that, we have like, why is this 10 cents? And it is, and just really, and so we pay close attention to who's asking for the bid, so like it's, and because we haven't found any experience in between that. And so we definitely try to, as someone who is going to have to fly in to do stuff, we kind of have to get on the higher end of that process because it's not viable for us to have everything nitpicked when we're coming all the way around the world to do it. So, I think that's probably our highest bid failure rate is what I tend to feel. So the highest number of things that we've had probably anywhere in the world where someone asks us to do something and then it gets canceled is the Middle East. So it's, there's a lot of ideas and not as many things that hit the ground. So I have to admit that I know for me, I kind of am never sure, in that area. But it is fun. There's a lot of beautiful places there to shoot in. So when we get to do them, we definitely want to, because the people are great, the locations are great, and it's usually interesting things to shoot. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is back with, this is a follow-up. Where can I find a great library of Mac shortcuts?
Go ahead, Eric.
Matthew Casanelli, MatthewCasanelli.com. He was part of the original team that built shortcuts, and he puts together a phenomenal starting SWAC at it. The other thing is, look in the library in shortcuts. There's actually a really nice little store, and you can start there.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and Finder level overall shortcuts are all well and good. I find I spend very little of my actual working time in the Finder or in that part of the OS. I really tend to work inside programs, and of course every program has its own universe of shortcuts that are specific to that. So I guess if I spent a lot more time on the desktop or in the Finder in my case, or in the operating system, I would really be interested in this. But for me, it's learning the program's shortcuts. If I'm in Word, I want to know the Word shortcuts. If I'm in Final Cut, all the shortcuts are going to be different because of its mode. So just notice how much time you're spending where, and make sure they're targeted to that.
I also learned the native shortcuts. Like Resolve has this option where you can have it be Final Cut, the Final Cut keystrokes. Then you go to somebody else's computer and Resolve has got all these different keystrokes. And so I just force myself to, for me, the hardest one is D and V, because to disable a track, it's V in Final Cut and D in Resolve. I'm always hitting the wrong one and just going, because my problem is I just did a project where we started it in Resolve and then ended up finishing it in Final Cut, and so it was just like this back and forth. Anyway, go ahead, Jason.
I read this a little bit differently. I read it as Shortcuts with a capital S, the application that is, eventually where Automator has gone. I believe Twit actually has a show, iOS Today, where they go extensively into this. And, if you want a walkthrough of that, that's great. If you actually are referring to keystrokes, it's too, there might be a keystrokepedia, but I'll just give you one. Command-Shift-D will send a mail, send your message in MacMail.
There we go. Yeah, the if it is shortcuts, I mean, the biggest thing to do is try to think of something you want to do and do it. I mean, I will admit that I don't study that much as I just do things and then absorb the information around it. Like I have Google open almost all the time, and I'm just Googling or YouTubing things all the time as I work, just to try to figure out how to use it while I'm using it. Next question.
Eric Nathan in Bellingham, Washington is up next. I'm working with a group building a podcast focused on playing live music and some conversation. What are your recommendations for setting up a studio?
Can you tell us a little bit more about it, Eric?
Sure. Essentially, there's 3 different artists who've been playing together in a band for years, but they all live in separate locations, and they want to be able to kind of play together, but they also want to be able to gather together and probably film. So we're going to do a combination of filming and audio.
I think
low
that
cost, that's what we're looking for.
And then they're answering questions potentially from the audience.
Yeah, that could be part of it as well.
Yeah. So I think that one thing that might be kind of interesting that we've seen work, especially when people are jamming a little bit, they're just playing, is if you think about having them, like well, let's do this again. If you have them here and then you have your cameras here, you can. Sorry, my brain is like not working today. So what you want to do is split these gaps. So for these singles, so they're all playing with each other. So it's kind of like they're in a rehearsal space and they're all playing, with each other, looking at each other. But you're getting a one-on. Now you can, if you want, then have some kind of higher wide shot that just you might have one or two of them. So we did this for one show, and I wanted to do it over and over again. So I'll just tell you what it is. It's not hard. It's not necessarily expensive. It's expensive to do it well. It's not expensive to do it, which is that we hung a arm at the center out here, and it goes down to here, and there's a camera on it. Leo has something very similar, and his has a little weight on it on the other end, and then we just pushed it, and it'll rotate around. It's a big arm, but it'll rotate around. Now, if it's a thin arm, the problem with it is it bounces. You have a bounce issue. But if it's a big, heavy arm, which is what we did, you just push it, and then you can put it on a little motor, and it will. You put it on you can put it on a server or a stepper. I would suggest a well-balanced arm with a stepper, because a stepper means that you know exactly where it is, in the process. But because then you can program it to stop in places if you want. A server will just tell it what to do, right? So anyway, then it just slowly moves around them. You get the shots are epic. They just look so cool, and you don't move very fast. It'll make people sick. So it's just this constant moving, and what happens is you just leave that over there moving while they're working, and every once in a while you just see something that's interesting and you just tap on it, and you just go over to, and grab onto it. But I think that camera option would be really cool. It does mean you have to dress the whole set. So then you want your gear outside the room and you build it up. But it is that combination of cameras, in my experience, has been pretty successful. And then that arm, again, got to use it once. We had the budget for one of Alex's crazy ideas, and it worked so well. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, a while back we had Dan Tepfer from Farplay on, and I've been watching a few of his jams with some remote artists from across the country. He'll be in New York and jam with somebody in San Francisco, and I would take some cues from him and take a look at using his app. If not that one, then Jam Kazam's another one to take a look at, and Unity Connect might even be one that gets expensive, but Unity Connect is another really fast, low latency piece, because I think that's your greatest piece of the puzzle to solve. And then Dan was just using some really cheap not super cheap, but GH5s can be had for, or maybe he was using GH4s, but both those cameras used give you a brilliant picture as long as you made it with a nice micro four thirds lens. And then you had an A10 mini. So those would be the recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill?
Eric, I'm confused. Are they in the same place playing together, or are they playing remotely and trying to sync that up?
It's a combination. So a couple of them have their own studios in different locations, but they're close enough that they could drive to the location. The idea is to produce constant podcasts, so like once a week, and so they're not always going to be able to get together.
Understood. Now that makes more sense to me. If they're in the same location at the same time, one of the things, because every time I shot live music, we tried to do kind of an audience mix with a stereo pair or something like that, but it was also really important to get all the stems, particularly if you want to present the music the best possible, because the mix in the room, even if they're not mixing for the audience, will be different than making sure that you have control in the back end to maximize the presentation of the sound they're creating. I found it particularly useful if you're talking about something and you wanted to have a three-piece combo and one of them was a flautist and you wanted to go back and hear the flute lines, to have that as a stem separately so that you can emphasize it might be a really useful thing. And also at the tail end of the show yesterday, that Orbitz product that Jeffrey went and looked at is, Alex, I think your idea in real life.
Yeah, I have to look at that. I barely saw that, but I did see something that looked really interesting there, so we should take a look at it. Do we know how much that thing cost?
I think he said it was like $1,500 or something like that, but it was a well-engineered... It was a well-engineered camera, a ballast on the back end. It had a light mounted to it, and it had the ability to do that 360 slowly, fast, whatever.
Ours was about 3 times that big, so it was a huge beast. It was not the most absurd thing that I've done, but one of the more absurd things that I've done. Think about, number one is you want as little audio in the room. Think about how you're going to return almost all the audio to their in-ears to make that work. And then the other thing you can think about is putting a screen under each camera. So if you shoot those gaps the way I talked about, you can have a zoom under each camera, but if you have a switcher that feeds those, you can switch back and forth between a text question coming in from something like Mukana, or the Zoom so they can play to it and see it, see folks in front of them. And I think that it would be very compelling. The more you can get it all set up and leave it set up, to your point, the more they can do it all the time. And I think that the thing that will make, especially people who are already fans, the thing that's really going to make a difference is not worrying about going through too many songs. I would say it's more about the conversation than the songs, because people can listen to the songs on Spotify anytime they want. So what you want to think about is how do you have it so that they're going through a song, they talk about the song, they talk about where, and to me the pinnacle of that was Dave Grohl talking about Everlong on YouTube. If you look at that description, like he talks about how he thought of it, he talks about what it took to do it and how he wrote it and the bits and pieces of it. But I find that's what makes those things special. And I think that's where their fans would come back over and over again, because they're going to dig into a song or a couple. Like you could literally do a podcast and every podcast is just a different song that they've written and what the thought process was and what were the inspirations and and I think that would be something that if you're a fan, you would definitely, jump on those songs, because every song has a story. Like it took a lot of work. Like, I think people forget, like there's thousands of songs, millions and millions and millions of songs on Spotify. And that meant something to somebody at some point, because they sat down and they wrote it, and it, and what did that take? What did it come from? So next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next with, what's the most effective means of presenting yourself when seeking an iOS development position or project?
Go ahead, Bill.
I think Alex has said this before, and I agree with 100%. You've got to have work that you can show. You've got to have developed something in iOS. All that anybody cares about is, can you actually do the work? And the proof of that is that you have done the work. There is an iOS app or something that you have created. Once you've done that, you'll be able to talk and explain how you've done it, and that's the next level. They want to make sure that you're not just presenting somebody else's work, that you actually done this.
Yeah, publish. Next question.
Eric Antonio in Washington, D.C. says, can smartphones, iPhone or Android, be used as a reliable incident light meter? And if so, can the panel recommend a favorite app?
I go, Jason.
Years ago, a guy named Alex Lindsay turned me on to Cinemeter and then Cinemeter 2. Cinemeter 2, I've never really used directly as an incident meter because you had to set a bias and it got a little weird. But have you ever found anything better, Alex?
Yeah, there's a, let me see if I don't know if he still sells it. Ben Syverson, who now is I think a director at IDEO, but he had a lighting, I thought he had a lighting app that he used. What you want is something that's going to create a light color that you can define. And I think he had a lighting one, but a lot of us, I can't remember which one it was, but we have used them. Here's what happens usually at NAB is a bunch of us are sitting around at Benihana's taking pictures of the food, and there's a whole bunch of iPhones and one person's shooting and everybody's move that light over a little bit, and you got all these basically human gaffers that are all kind of like human C-stands that are all moving around, and we try to shoot the perfect shot of what we're doing at the restaurant. So anyway, I know that there are some apps out there that just created. Ben Syverson created one a long time ago, but I don't see it here. So that's the one we used to use. But what you're looking for is some kind of one that will create colored lights on colored images on your phone. Next question.
Next one comes from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia, and he says, the small church I'm working with has been posting private video to YouTube. We're still getting copyright claims each week. Can you again mention music that will allow us to move forward without these copyright claims?
Go ahead, David.
Alex mentioned it the other day, and I also use it, Epidemic Sound, which is really, really powerful. The great thing about Epidemic Sound is that they pre-authorize all of your music on YouTube. So as long as you have a subscription, when you attach the music to the video, even if you cancel your subscription, that music will continue to be protected and you shouldn't get any takedowns.
Go ahead, Eric.
You know, in a small church environment where you're singing these songs and then copyrights are being applied, the way we do it, we have a church of about 120. We actually live stream through a restreamer and then later on go into YouTube and clip those clips down to the sermon. And I think you're probably running a risk if you leave those things up that somebody's going to file a claim whether or not you have rights to sing it.
And you can post things on things like, if you want to post something for people to watch, and it's a small group of people, look at something like Vimeo, because Vimeo, I don't think, does the copyright pass on it. So you could post things to Vimeo instead of YouTube. And I think you might be in a better place as far as that goes. But what Eric said is correct, which is most of the time what we see houses of worship doing is once they go into the post, they just post the sermon. They don't post the music around it. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What separates a successful podcast from a run-of-the-mill podcast?
Good, Jason.
It depends, but I'll give this a shot. It needs to be well-produced. It needs to sound like something that someone who knows how radio should sound should sound. And lastly, and most importantly, you need a format and a topic that you are insanely passionate about, because you have to do it over and over and over and over again. And you have to figure out how to be creative with it, because the most successful podcasts, I think, have an insane longevity almost to their authors, amazement.
Yeah, I think that the number one thing, of course, is a subject that people care about. So that's the first thing that you have to figure out. What is that subject? The second thing is going to be the host for that. And a lot of people that host podcasts came out of radio. And the hard part is it's very hard. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to do a podcast out of the gate if you don't have some experience doing it. It's just hard to understand how to use the radio format or the approach to it and how to speak and so on and so forth. And so I think that's a challenge. Then there is the format, and you have to figure out what's sustainable. So when someone says, I want to do a podcast, I usually say, I need you to do 20. Like write 20, don't do them, but write 20 out and think about, like, if you can't get to 20, do not start your podcast, because once you turn it on, it's the machine. The machine is turned on. You need to do it every week. You can't, if you're sporadic, it'll never take off. Don't think about doing it more often than every week. If you overwhelm subscribers, they stop listening. Like it's a crazy thing. Like, so if you put out a bunch of stuff all the time that's like an hour long every day, we've tried this. People will get overwhelmed. They feel a backlog. They feel guilty that they're not watching all this content, and then they tend to stop. And so it actually too much is, you can have too much of a good thing. So spread it out. I like to think about, for my brain, I try to think of 4 different subjects for the month. I'm going to do this, and on the wild card weeks I do something different. But the reason I do that is that sometimes it's overwhelming to think of 20 or 30 pieces, but it's easier to think of one, that for that week, or 4 groups of things, and put things into the boxes. And then finally, to what Jason said, it has to sound good. I think a lot of times we see people who have great production quality and they don't have anything to listen to. And then you have people who are really smart and don't pay any attention to the mics, to everything else that they're doing. So you have to have solid audio quality, or it's not worth it. The fortunate thing is it's not very expensive. I mean, you can put everything together that you need for less than $1,000, and then after that, it's mostly just time. So it's a really great thing. But I think that you have to think through those things carefully before you get started. Next question.
Next question comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. The Triad Orbit gear guy was showing looks amazing. Before I pull the trigger, is there any other modular rolling stands in that price range that I should look at? And he was looking at a fully kitted with a laptop tray for about $1,000 to $1,500 US.
A good guy.
Yeah, so in the Discord, we've been bouncing back some of the images and share your setup. I had talked about some of the things I was going to take to NAB, and I had seen these guys at Cinegear, which basically it's patented technology that puts this base. They started doing this like in the 50s with the Starbird for putting boom mics over the top of a choir, but now they said they've got all this modular stuff that you can just go nuts with. It does get up there in price quick, but this is the stuff that's not going to fall over. It's not going to break. It's not the cheap Chinese stuff that's just going to fail on you. If you want the highest quality stuff, that's Triad Orbit. So you look at this stuff, it's just overbuilt. And as long as you're getting the right pieces, you're going to be able to, get your gear where you want it to go. So it's meant to go in tight spaces in studios, inside of pianos. But this device that we're talking about is this rolling stand. It doesn't normally come with these casters, but we stuck the casters on there. And you can do things like laptops. I think by the end, we'd build this thing out. Yeah, there's the tray that he's looking at getting. So you can put your laptop or your A10 Mini there, so you can be switching down below. I'll put a link to this video. This was just a Facebook Live that we did from our showroom. And you can see that's the Triad Orbit rep. And he kind of goes on for like 20 minutes just showing all these pieces. And I think at one point I get crazy and say, hey, can you put a PTZ camera up there? And so he's got, this crazy PTZ DSLR, bundle of just everything. And an iPad. So, I mean, you can go really nuts with this stuff. So a lot of fun. I'll put the link to this in the Mukana Chat, and you guys can watch it at your leisure.
That's great. Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas again. Does anyone ever use green screen on office hours?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I think a few people actually have done it, and fewer still have gotten away with it. It's very obvious, particularly if you incorporate virtual backgrounds from Zoom. It just shows up bad. But for example, David Brady does a great job with his. Don't really notice the edges. It's a good representation. But for the most part, most people aren't using green screens.
Nick uses it. You can see Nick has a green screen there, but Nick is follically aerodynamic, so it makes it easier to key. Go ahead.
I like
Jason.
to say that I have a head for compositing.
Go ahead, Jason.
I don't know. It's a little shiny. No, for the first year I did actually, and I was actually just keying a green screen and making this gray. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has been done, but honestly, it's not worth it.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and so I mean, this is what I do. I focus on using Unreal Engine, being inside the metaverse with holographic screens and such. So I fully admit that I'm a bit of a special case. So I honestly really appreciate the live backdrops that everyone has really put some effort into, and the various lighting techniques that are going on back there. So, I don't know that this is something that I would recommend for general use. For myself, and a lot of the things I teach, this is a really effective environment for me to be within when I'm presenting over Zoom.
Yeah, I think that for me, what I I think it's hard to do. I started off doing green screen actually for office hours. I find that it's hard to do it at a level that I find acceptable, even with really good tools. For myself, I want to feel every wispy hair. And one of the things that the reason that I do that is that I feel like we're already in a virtual world, and so we've already created this kind of unreal kind of feeling, and I want the rest of it to be organic. Like I want it to feel real behind people. It's why I don't like. It's one of the reasons I don't like virtual backgrounds. Nick does virtual backgrounds in the way you should do virtual backgrounds, but if you can't do it at that level, I kind of feel like just stick with the physical background. You know, we've done events, and I walk away from a lot of events going, I'm really, you know, it was so much fun to watch all these people in their own home environments, you know, or their own areas. I love the fact, you know, we started going towards a lot of us using gray. I just have windows behind me. It'd be impossible for me to do what I'm doing until I put something else back there. So I do it out of laziness, but I love I love the fact that our panel, at first I thought I wanted everyone to be gray. So it was just like this cool panel, everybody looks the same. But I realized what was really cool about it is the backgrounds, is that we see a little bit of everybody's home, you know, as I think or office or whatever they've chosen to show, but it's their personality. And so I think that's a really great place to start. Next question.
Next one comes from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. What is the recommended backup computer for me, as I only have a Mac Mini, a laptop or another Mac Mini, trying to be proactive?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think with backups in general, it's important to consider what risk you're guarding against. If you're just looking to protect against the primary computer failing and you needing to swap out, then that might be one thing. But if the risk is different, that your workstation may have an environmental problem, you've got to get up and work somewhere else, then, you know, a laptop may be better for that situation, depending on whether you need exactly the same functionality ready to go on your backup, or whether you can operate with perhaps a limited set and what I/O you need. But either way, keep that backup maintained so that if you need it, when you need it, it's ready to go.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yes, I'm really trying to have a backup for Conversation with Tony Mobley, as well as a backup for the work that I do with the church. I've had a few scares where my Mac Mini just crashed, and so I wanted to try to be, you know, forward thinking and proactive in that. I wanted to be able to, if something goes down, then go to another machine and not be, you know, just out of, you know, off. So that was the reason.
Generally for backup, I use the same computer that I'm using for the primary. So I'd recommend another Mac Mini on my end. Next question.
Next question comes from David Brady in New York City. And David says, any good resources for video or audio test files? Looking to set up a Zoom room at the office and with a looping file that people can use to test the Zoom room build out.
Interesting. I mean, the ultimate thing that we're close to getting, I just have to figure it out, is the SRI test, but that's probably more than you need. We do that to interrogate the entire signal. I don't know of any good, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to test. So are you trying to test sync? Are you trying to test, you know, there's a variety of different things you could be testing there. So I think you have to think about what are the aspects of what you're doing there. Eric, real quick.
Yeah, I was going to say after hours, just to have a link into after hours, and we'll be.
Yeah,
glad
but I
to
think
test
this is
it
for people can use. I guess I think it's for people to test it at the company, which I don't know if you can definitely send everyone in the company to after hours, but I'm not sure if that's the. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Real quick, the kind of base level for everything is bars and tone. You can find that on the internet. That'll throw up a standard SMPTE set of bars. It shows all the colors. If you use that with a vector scope, it'll show you whether things are on or off, and a standard 1K test tone at 0 dB. But that's kind of like square one.
Next question.
John Merrill in Phoenix, Arizona is up next. He says, I'm looking for a box that will convert NDI to HDMI to feed a TV or monitor. Any suggestions?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, probably the cheapest route to go is the Apple TV, and then get the Sienna app. It's $99, and you can install it on as many Apple TVs as you want. I'm using a Bird Dog and also a Magewell Pro Convert. The other models that we see flying out are KiloView, Bird Dog. There's one more, and I'm forgetting it. And then I know that Epiphan, the one that I have behind me at the lower level, doesn't do it, but then there's the next level up that'll bring in NDI and convert it. And the benefit there is you can do other flavors as well, like SRT to HDMI if you ever need to do that.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Guy hit on what exactly works. BirdDog just announced a new pod that works well. And if you're cheap like I am, you can pop your Apple TV into the system and use Sienna to get your NDI out of that. And it's just a quick and easy way to get it into your Extreme if you got an extra Apple TV floating around.
Last question of the first hour.
Douglas Carmichael, my dad mentioned that there is no demand for iOS developers as opposed to IT infrastructure-related positions, and thus studying iOS is a waste of time. What have you heard?
Go, Jason.
Thus, father does not know best. I don't know of any unemployed iOS developer, period.
Sorry, I'm sorry for thinking it's so funny.
I'm sure your dad's a nice guy, but
I'm sure
no.
he is. That there's a much drunker. I don't even know how to say it. It's like I think that I think that I don't like a Honda Accord is faster than a Ferrari is I think that now it feels. Go ahead, Eric.
Oh, I was just going to say IT infrastructure is becoming more and more automated.
Yeah.
And that means less and less IT people are needed.
I mean, Apple made playgrounds. They do constant outreach. They are so desperate for iOS developers that they are ready to, Apple and Google are both basically bypassing the colleges and schools and everything else and going straight to the population because they can't, I mean, it is literally like a tree trying to get to water and all those roots just trying to go out and just going around anything that you were planning to give it because it's so desperate for that water. There is it is iOS developers are, if you're a good iOS developer, you are employed, period. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, there is a absolute standard in the world, and it is that money follows eyeballs. What are people actually looking at? And these days, iOS or mobile things outstrips all broadcast, all of everything else by multiple factors.
Yeah, it's Rupert, real quick. We're going to jump to the second hour.
To extend on Eric's point from the IT infrastructure perspective also, I mean, sure, there's some infrastructure still out there, but more and more is going cloud-based, of course. So, for on-premise infrastructure, that's getting a smaller picture moving forward.
Yeah, go ahead, Kenneth.
Perhaps there's a generation gap that needs to be considered there too.
Yeah. I think it's just not understanding what it is, but there's just this huge, I mean, everybody talks about how much trouble they have getting it because the problem is it takes a long time to become an iOS developer. You can't just become an iOS developer and you can go to a 6-week course and start in IT, and it doesn't mean you're going to be great at it, but it means that you understand the basic things. iOS is not like that, so it takes a long time to get good at it so you do have to be a good iOS developer, but yeah, there's a pretty strong demand for it. Anyway, we're now going to change subjects to our second hour, and we're so excited to have Nick Jushchyshyn back. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Going good.
It's great to have you here, and you have been deep into the Unreal world. Instead of being deep into the real world, you've been deep into the Unreal world, and working with Unreal 5. Can you tell us a little bit about what is new?
So, two of the biggest things under the hood with Unreal 5 are the way it handles high volume geometry. So
this is the nanite.
This is nanite, right? Exactly. So they call it nanite. I try to avoid the buzzwords.
Nanite.
But, nanite is their big thing. The big deal behind that is it will digest raw photogrammetry results and play them back with real-time fidelity. I guess I don't know if I can share my screen. I'm going to give it a try. I haven't tried yet.
Yep.
All right. So this is like a little Unreal Engine demo of that. It's available on YouTube. But what we're looking at here is a desert scene that is full of individual photogrammetry scans of genuine rocks and cliff faces and things like that. And it's able to be presented and lit in real time. And so here's some of the diagnostics of the system running under the hood.
Now what are we seeing here?
What we're seeing is this is nanite analyzing the light bounces and light going through the scene. And I'm trying to find, this is the one that I was really looking for. So what's happening here is this is showing you the outlines of individual photogrammetry models. And this is nanite breaking the high density geometry down into more digestible pieces. And it's all running behind the scenes on the graphics processor. And it only is processing what is on screen in a given moment. So this universe, this world that it's showing could be completely around the camera, and it can go for miles and miles, but only what the camera sees right now is being processed through the GPU on GPU memory. And it's being chunked out so that higher detail is favoring the foreground objects, and background objects are being dropped in detail so that they can be processed faster.
Typically, we would call that level of detail. And for the LODs, is it something that you're pre-building, or is it something that Nanite manages for you, or Unreal manages for you, as far as level of detail as it gets further from the camera?
So it's a little bit of both. So when you bring a photogrammetry asset into Unreal Engine, there's a checkbox to activate whether you want that asset to be processed by Nanite or not. So now you can selectively choose what's going through the Nanite system. But once it's in Nanite, then everything else is happening for you as the artist behind the scenes, being processed by Unreal Engine automatically.
It's great.
It
just brings an entirely different level of realism to what we're actually, what we're seeing. I mean, we saw it when they saw the preview of this a year ago, and it's just stunning. The amount of detail. Is there any limitations to what Nanite can manage? People,
storage space.
Right.
So there is a limitation when you bring up people. It is limited right now to what we call in Unreal Engine static mesh geometry. So it's not intended for people where the geometry, like their arms and legs and necks and stuff, those things bend, they deform. And so Nanite does not process deforming geometry. Now, it can be used for highly detailed armor, for example. So you could have a low polygon human wrapped in, high density mesh armor, and that armor could be in Nanite, and it can be animated, it can be moving, it just can't be deforming because
it can't bend
the way it caches. Right, it can't bend. But one of the big demo pieces right now was initially released on Xbox as a fully playable game, and then the literal source code, everything you need to make that game is available as a free download from the folks at Epic, and it is this expansive city that was modeled off of the idea of the Matrix. And so you can actually there's something very meta about being in the metaverse, in the Matrix, walking through it and navigating it. And this city goes on for miles and miles, and it is a collaboration with side effects. So there's a lot of Houdini procedural building going on in there. Some of the things that are going on in that procedural building, let's see if I can show my mouse so I can point to things. Capture settings, show the mouse pointer. Okay, so hopefully now you can see hey, look, I was just talking about Divi. Up in the windows, for example, you can see inside these buildings. The really cool thing about this is that's a shader. Like if you were to move your camera into the building, it's just a hollow shell, but it looks like there's three-dimensional rooms inside of all of these windows, and that's entirely being done by a shader. Loads of detail in the throughout the city and the lighting. So the cars are all procedurally driven, and there's traffic systems going on, as well as the crowds and the people. And so all of this is something that you could load onto your computer. You would need a powerful computer. This is not something you're going to put on an iOS device and use, but it's a really tremendous demonstration of the detail that is achievable by Nanite. So all of these buildings are built of components that are photogrammetry components. So, we're seeing like this little piece here might be the same piece of photogrammetry over and over again, all over that building, and the window mortices and the traffic lights and all of that sort of thing. So this is really where the power of this shines. And all along here, this is being played back in this example at 68 frames per second. And so, again, coming from the world of ray traced rendering, where you wait for minutes, hours, days for a render for something like this, this is phenomenal. And this is working in conjunction with another big piece of technology under the hood, and that they call it Lumen. And that is a screen space global illumination tool set. So again, running on the GPU, invisible to the viewer's eye is a three-dimensional grid of light samples. So there are basically light catching samplers picking up all the light that's reflecting off the street here. And so that light would reflect and illuminate any objects on the sides of that sunlight. So that sunlight would bounce up and everything.
Is Unreal running at with HDR?
Yes, you can use HDR in Unreal. So this could be in this case, the sky is actually a full simulation. So there is a simulated location for the sun, and it has a certain number of lumens of intensity. There's volumetric clouds and all of that sort of thing. And this can be switched into a night mode. So there's a variety of samples going on in here. And so you can see, by the way, here's Lumen, where the sunlight's bouncing off these buildings and filling in underneath the freeway.
I mean, and we think about storytelling, people have already been doing, they've already been doing Saturday morning cartoons with it, with Unreal. There is a lot building up around this. You can see how for pre-visualization, it's almost the movie at this point. I mean, that's what I started in. And so pre-visualization has come a long way. I think that at this point, you could be telling great stories if it's really about the writing. If we look at a lot of these things, there was one that was like a horrible 3D, it was Little Red Riding Hood. It's called, what was it? Remember there was one about it redoes Little Red Riding Hood over and over and over again from different animals' perspectives. And I think it might have been called Hoodwinked. And it was done maybe 15 years ago, and great movie, bad graphics, didn't matter. So when I look at that and they made a lot of money, they didn't do it for very much money. And then they put it out and they made, a 4X or 5X or whatever, on the return. I look at this and I think that kind of movie would be amazing here. This isn't a replacement for Pixar. It's not a replacement for yet. It is not a replacement, but you could tell great stories and do entire films at this point, inside of Unreal. I think with this is the big up. I don't know. I mean, Nick, do you feel it as big an upgrade as it seems? I mean, this seems like the big change.
This is an order of magnitude increase in the fidelity that you can generate, and it's completely free. On top of that, right? So Unreal 4, I think it was released 8 or 9 years ago. And so that was how long that generation of tool set. And it in itself has had many transformational effects on storytelling in general, in production of episodics and films and in animation. And now this is truly a next generation increment. So it was fully worthy of going up to Unreal 5 from 4. There are so many changes. It's difficult to get into them all.
They also built, and by the way, if you have questions about the metaverse or if you have questions about Unreal or any of the stuff we're talking about here, go ahead and throw those into the hopper. We'll get to you pretty quickly here. But I think that the interesting thing is just the business model as well. They just keep buying stuff and giving them away. Like, here, you can have this. It's a matter, because now tell us how does the business model actually work?
So for the vast majority, in terms of numbers of users, the Unreal Engine itself is free. And what we call the assets, the things that go into building a world like this, those are available for free. So like you can even just get just the cars for free and the streets and the street signs. And so you can custom build your own environment, and it's 100% free. If you build an application and sell that application. So it could be a VR experience, it could be a training tool, it could be a video game, whatever. It's still free up until you've earned $1 million of revenue. And after that, Epic would like 5% after that. So if you sell $1,100,000, 1% of that extra $100,000 or 5% of that $100,000 goes to them. Now, this is not their only revenue stream, right? So Unreal is free, but my daughter constantly asks for more V-Bucks. So, my family is is buying Fortnite V-Bucks on a fairly regular basis, and that goes to the same company. The other thing is that at a corporate level, you can purchase licensing and support. So if you are a corporate studio, whether you're producing for actual entertainment episodics or broadcast, or maybe you're an internal corporate broadcast or production studio, it makes sense to purchase support, and that can be thousands of dollars. And so all of these studios, technically they could use the software for free, but then they're using the same forums as everybody else to get support. But if you're mission critical, you go ahead and buy corporate licensing, corporate support, and so that they get revenue streams from that as well. Then there's also something called the Unreal Engine Marketplace. That's where all of these assets live. Where you can go and browse, and all of the material from Epic Games that's in the marketplace, that's free. But it is also a marketplace for third parties. It could be myself or anyone. For example, you do photogrammetry and you just happen to specialize in something like exotic car tires, something like that. Like you're going to have this library of car tires that nobody else has. Well, you can make that available through the marketplace, put a price on it, and sell it. And just like iTunes or other profit sharing models, a portion of those sales will go to the folks that create Unreal Engine and such. And of course, you get the revenue for yourself. So those assets that are available include animations. So if you have the ability to do animation or motion capture stage, you can create animations. And I think that there's an immense opportunity right now to identify what are all those background things that are needed to create a story. Like, is there enough animation out there of people eating in the background at a restaurant and waiters and waitresses delivering food? Is there enough background information out in the world for people waiting in line at a checkout counter or shopping or, looking at train schedules at the train station? All of these types of assets are the kinds of things that filmmakers that are looking at this either as a tool for pre-visualization or for Final Pixel, they're going to want to purchase and download these things so that they can get on with telling their story, but they need to fill out that world in the background. And so that's another revenue stream for them.
And you even see things like Kit Bash 3D is like the kind of example where they just built a whole bunch of environments that you can possibly throw in there and start to work with. And as Nick said, that they already have there. And then didn't they build a first person shooter that they just gave away the code? Like here is a first person shooter game, and then you can customize it, right?
Absolutely. So like this is a first person explorer, I suppose, this Matrix thing, but there's a much lighter weight game called Lyra. And by lighter weight, I mean, it doesn't have as heavy assets in it, right? So this, by the way, this city is a 100 gigabyte download, and that's just to copy it to your computer. And then it generates a project folder set that's over 100 gigabytes in itself. So you need a lot of space. Lyra is very lightweight. That's only a couple of gigabytes or so, but it highlights a lot of the interactive technologies and the ways that you can design procedural geometry. So that this is a wall by definition, and I want to put a window in it. And so you can actually do some 3D modeling in there and work on just the whole interactivity. And, there's an opponent and it's got some degree of intelligence to it. If it sees you or not, what it does, those types of things. So there are entire libraries of these examples. Some of them get installed with Unreal Engine. So when you create a new project, you don't have to end up with a blank screen. You could start a new project with that video game as being the base of your project.
Anything else new that we should know about?
The other thing is actually nothing to do with Unreal 5, but there is another one of these free projects that came out. It's called the Hype Chamber, and it is a full project of basically sports style graphics and bumpers. And so what we're seeing here is it in use in a Rocket League esports setting. And essentially what this project is a set of procedural graphics. So what we're seeing here is some of the renders and results in the bumpers. But what's interesting from a production standpoint is this is preloaded with spreadsheets full of these are the names of the games or the different teams and their team colors and their logos and such. And so this makes it so that you could just select which teams are playing each other, and it can operate both in a rendered mode. So there's a render batching system where you could say, all right, I need this week, I need this team versus this team versus this team. And it'll render out all of those graphics in advance for you with all the matchups. And then you can also operate it in a live mode where these graphics actually populate, something that would either be a video feed or could be used in, on-set displays, on-set LED walls and such. So like these walls right now are actually being fed live from that project. So I think that's a super cool project there.
And we've started and stopped a little bit, but we're definitely going to get back into some of the Unreal stuff as we move forward throughout this year. So we wanted to kind of introduce it. Definitely let us know what you're interested in talking more about. This is for the producers. I know that I'm really I have an idea for a first-person shooter, so I think I might open that up and play with it a little bit. Anyway, let's jump into the questions.
Eric Antonio from Washington, D.C. has our first one here. Does the panel anticipate a revenue-generating path for small-scale photogrammetry modeling entrepreneurs? If so, can the panel recommend a clearinghouse or wanted list for models?
I think Nick touched on this a little bit already, which is that there's a fair number of things. There's two things that here that are there's Unreal. And I think there's going to be a growing number of things around environments, around specific objects. And then there is also USDZ, which are not going to be the same file formats necessarily, but probably convertible to each other. And I think that USDZ is going to also be a big place that you want to look at Apple. We'll know in a couple weeks, like how big a deal USDZ is going to be, because usually every WWDC is when we get to see the next big push of what USDZ means to Apple. So I think those are two different worlds. So one is that Unreal has this huge demand for environments and things and movements, just people walking around. And I think that there's a lot of things there. And then the other, when it comes to USDZ, I think it's everything else. so I don't think that USDZ for Apple, at least at the beginning, is going to be environments or necessarily motion capture. But if eventually we see it inside of the Office app, that when you know that the explosion is about to happen at Apple, it'll be when you see Pages, Keynote, and potentially even Numbers support USDZ. We already see it in Motion, Final Cut. You can open them in preview. All of us feel like we can, you're not even reading the tea leaves. The tea leaves are actually spelled out as USDZ, is coming. And so it's, so I think that when those hit, the demand will be intense. Now, there's going to be two things that happen. One is the price per model will drop dramatically because it's a different market, but the demand for them, so school items, business items, science items, all these other things that are, general items that you want to put into because remember, now you can take your object, throw it in there and rotate it around and set it down and have it be an image or leave it available to the viewer to sit there. Like I can be opening a Pages document and be able to have have this thing rotating around, and I can rotate it around as the user and look at something and pull it back and even tap on it and have it appear on my desk in front of me. And that is this year. It works now. Like if you go to clarity.io and download the thing that Chris Ritchie built for them, you will see a model that you can download and put on your desk at scale, looks exactly the way the real one looks. And so I think that is a real that's a real opportunity there. So I think that there's two different modeling opportunities, and someone's going to make millions on those things. Go ahead, Nick.
And there are a few clearinghouses in existence. I mean, I was showing about the Unreal, the marketplace, and that, of course, is specific to Unreal Engine, and it has certain conveniences built into it. But there's also Sketchfab, is been a popular site for many years, and I think actually Epic just recently purchased them. But you can get USDZ models, OBJ, FBX, and that's more of a neutral playing field in terms of sharing assets that you can sell. So you can put a price on these things. I know Turbo Squid gets pointed out a lot. I haven't really, I can't recall ever purchasing something from them, but I know that there's
I'm practically an investor.
Oh, okay, there you go. So, there you go. Practically an investor.
Yeah. When you're in a business,
those are good places.
Yeah, when you're in a business to do this, when you have to generate a model, the math that you go through really quickly in your head is how much does it cost to pay someone to make this, and how much does it cost to buy the model? For simple models, I buy them. For simple models, I build them, or I hire someone to build them. For a complex or a custom model, I'll hire someone to build it. For a relatively complex model, like I needed a whole theater, and I just went up and bought a theater for $160. That was going to cost thousands of dollars to pay someone to build, as opposed to just buying the model. So and then there's an integration that we see with Unreal. So I used the reality scan, which is in beta right now, to go take pictures. I took a picture of a bolt. I know it's not very exciting, but I took a picture of a bolt, and then it appears. So what happens is you're in reality scan, and I took 60 pictures of a bolt actually. And what's really cool about it is it fills in. It starts off with you just taking photos, and it shows you where the photos are. And then it starts building these little blocks, and the blocks that are green, it thinks it has good coverage. The blocks that are red and yellow, not enough coverage yet. So you keep on like working the different angles and trying to get all the blocks to turn green. When they all turn green, you get something that looks, and for some reason my computer is not doing this very well. So we'll see this, but this is the, this is the bolt, and you can see me turning. It's going to turn slowly. It shouldn't turn this slowly, but for some reason it is. But this was just me experimenting with this. And if you look at the wireframe, hopefully it'll do this. Yeah, there we go. So you can see this is why we like decimation. This is the undecimated version. And if we, I think if we zoom in here, you'll see that as I get closer, you can kind of see where the outlines are. I went through it. Anyway, so it is it's a lot of polygons, and this one picked up like all the little specks of rust, and everything else are all geometry. And so I think that there's going to be a big market also as just a service. So again, the folks that want to show you how something works, I'm trying to find, like, eventually there's going to want to be a 3D model of this that the company will pay for, so that it's on their website, that you can rotate around, pull it open, show people how to do stuff. I think that, IKEA has already been working on a lot of that stuff already. Amazon now has things where I can tap on something I want to buy. If I'm on an iPhone, I was looking for something to go underneath my television, and I just saw a little button down there that said 3D, and I hit it, and it just showed up in my room, through my phone. And so if you're in the phone on Amazon, they're modeling lots of things. And so there's a service industry, there's general objects, there's the environment. It's a pretty exciting time right now if you're a 3D modeler. I was going to go ahead. No.
Okay. I was just going to add that, in terms of finding your market, is to just think about the background of things. This is a virtual production shoot I did last week, and the background is all in Unreal Engine, but this was thrown together really quickly with video game assets. So I mean, they're actually pretty low resolution. This is what that city kind of looks like through a Coke anamorphic lens on an RELF. These backgrounds, like you're thinking about the storyteller needing to tell their story, or a film production company needs to shoot their film, a television series needs to get a shot in a location and get out. The things that go into making that shot look authentic are what people are going to want to go ahead and buy really quickly. Oh, $25. Yeah. Let's get that. Like, where film production used to, a on-set production would be about plastering and painting and carpentry and all of that. Now $25 to drag and drop a bunch of lampposts into a scene that are, San Francisco lampposts is going to be useful. And so that sort of material organized well, it will get a lot of use as more and more of these productions lean into this tool set.
And there's a lot of things that may seem mundane, but we started using a lot of just SketchUp for pre-visualization, and now we're looking at Unreal. I have all this stuff as a 3D model, and I can let a client wander through it and show them, this is where the stage is going to be, and this is where all the lights are going to be, and this is where all the bits and pieces, and this is how it'll look. And it's a lot easier for them to visualize than CAD drawings. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. And Tony says, will the Unreal Engine update work better on the Mac Mini than previous Unreal Engine versions?
What do you think?
Yeah, no. I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly.
It will work, but the same things, the same things that didn't work in Unreal 4 are not going to work in Unreal 5. So you still don't have access to live video, for example. Unreal Engine is designed to be scalable, right? So you can build something in Unreal for an iPhone and it'll run fine. You will not be able to do the highest performance features, the full resolution metahumans are going to be a struggle. Nanite is designed to run on NVIDIA GPUs, which aren't supported on the Mac. So a lot of those higher end features are just not going to be supported there, but you can use the scalability features in Unreal to ease off of the level of detail and still use it. It's just some of those higher end features are just not going to play well on the Mac Mini.
Next question.
Joel in Mumbai, India says, what all should one be aware of while taking on a project for the metaverse? For example, how would guests join? How would we capture ISO feeds? And lastly, interactivity between the metaverse and the regular guest.
So I'll let Alex answer on that very last bit because I know what that's going to be. But the the ISO feeds are both Zoom. You can get Zoom ISO to pick up isolated feeds of your panelists connected, and those isolated feeds can be streamed out either to SDI or NDI. And if you're using Unreal Engine can bring either of those into its environment live. So I'm in my environment right now through the use of an SDI connection, but the holographic video screens are being fed in through NDI. So I think Microsoft Teams also now has support for SDI and NDI output. So there are various technologies, and also I guess vMix, right? You can do a vMix call, and vMix supports taking all of those panelist connections as being independent video feeds. So all of those exist, and all of those could be used with a tool like Unreal Engine. When it comes to mixing interactivity between virtual and I'm guessing regular, you mean by in person. If it's all a show, if all the audience is participating virtually, whether it's over a stream or other virtual mechanism, that's okay. But it's rough if you want to try and have a live audience and also a virtual audience.
Yeah, the hardest part right now is that even with a metahuman, one thing Nick and I spent a lot of time on last year was getting a metahuman to really look like a human, and to have them move the same way we expect and everything else. And I think that the real challenge is going to be, as we go into the metaverse, is that uncanny valley. So as you get closer to it, like we're happy with Apple's shapes, our emojis. Apple obviously is getting ready for this for years. This is how Apple works. And then we get into something that looks realistic, and our brain immediately expects it to go all the way. And then that uncanny valley is how uncomfortable we feel. So the real challenge for the metaverse is that the emojis will be fine for a little while, but as we get closer and closer to real, it's going to get much worse before it gets better. And there may be years in that trough of us of it being super weird and our brain being very the fundamental problem is that I think that we're running into with social media around communities as well as the metaverse of what's coming is this problem of the frontal lobe telling us this should be something, that this should be a community. This should be the real world. This should be a, it is making that up in its head, and the lower brain saying, I'm not getting what I needed. Like I needed a hug, like I need to feel connected. I need something like that we do get from video. I think we see this in after hours and office hours. We're connected because we see people and we feel like they're so, like if I just squint my eyes just a little bit, a whole meaning changes, of what I meant. That's very hard to reproduce. And I think that the delta between the lower brain not getting what it needs and the frontal lobe saying this is what it should be, the space between those is filled with depression. And so I think that's why we see people get upset, because they start, I've told the story now 100 times, but the way I kill ants is that I feed them. I see them and I don't kill them. I just throw down a little pile of sugar and let them start to eat it. And then I start cutting it with Splenda until they disappear. And the reason they disappeared is because I just starved them to death. They can't tell the difference between the Splenda and the sugar. And so that's what social media and potentially the metaverse is going to do to us. So it's not that the metaverse isn't coming or isn't going to be powerful. It's that we have to pay very close attention to how it affects us getting what we actually need as a community and as a human. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for the metaverse. Go ahead, Rick.
I just want to mention an extremely useful plugin that I use called Off-World Live Streaming Toolkit. And that does some real-time, very low latency NDI and spout ins and outs for Unreal. So you can do multiple NDI cameras, multiple NDI sources. And it's fantastic. It's free for, I'm sorry, what was it?
Who makes it again?
Off-World. It's OWL is kind of the acronym that they go by on the plugin store or in the marketplace.
Yeah.
But it's been an absolutely valuable toolkit for me, and it's extremely easy to set up, and like I said, no latency, and yeah.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. Next question.
Matt Halverson in Brookings, South Dakota says, I've seen the Morehouse College Metaversity video, and the graphics look like they are from PlayStation 1. When will we get photorealistic metagraphics?
I think that's a function of the skill set of people creating it right now. They're creating an idea, but they don't necessarily have what Morehouse probably doesn't have enough of are real-time 3D, art, folks that can build this stuff. It's capable right now of having something much closer to photorealistic than what's there. The problem really is having that, because the issue you have mostly with those artists is as fast as they learn how to do it, they have a job. Because there's so much demand for that type of a 3D modeler that if they get good at it, if they show skill, they don't last very long in school. They go get a job for more than they were paying for school. So anyway, so I think that's the challenge, but I think that it's not a function that the technology is not there. It's just for what they're doing so far. I think people have been limited, and again, they didn't have this. And I think we see the same thing. I mean, I don't think that Microsoft did their metaverse example wasn't particularly realistic either. And I think that some people are to exactly what I was talking about before, trying to stay away from being too photorealistic because they're afraid you'll get into that uncanny valley and then people get upset. Anything to add, Nick?
No, my first reaction was going to be that someone might design that way specifically to avoid falling into the uncanny valley, number one. And that, I think that another thing that you had pointed out, that whole life being part of it, I think that, having a live video element to it is going to be something that becomes increasingly critical. And that pipeline is not something that just everybody off the shelf has. I think that a lot of folks that know 3D and know how to work with these interactive, game engines, whether it's Unreal or Unity, tend to not to necessarily have the depth of knowledge of the video production pipeline, and just even lighting and all of it, and sound. And so all of those things really need to come together well to be effective. And so I'm sure we will get there.
Yeah, exactly. Next question.
Rick Markley in Baraboo, I believe that's in Wisconsin, says more of a comment. There is an interior mapping shader for free in the Unreal Marketplace right now.
So you're talking about what we saw there with the rooms, Rick?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Nick was pointing out in his demo that the rooms kind of look hollow, but this interior mapping shader lets you build little room kind of like dioramas out of 2D slices that you can then add parallax to. So as you're walking by or driving by the different apartments and whatnot, the interiors can have these 2D parallaxed elements that make it seem more realistic and give a lot more realism.
Yeah, so I'll share that. Yeah, I was just going to say that. So this is it, and I think that what's really neat about this is it's the classic 2.5D trick that we've used in camera projection, matte painting for decades, where a single square image is broken up into 9 panels. And so one of those panels is the back of the room, one is the left and the right, there's the ceiling and the floor. Then there is a set of panels that are used to define masks for the depth. So a really neat little sample here where these 3 are alpha channels. And then, this one is just like a foreground for, drapes over the windows or some kind of window decoration is this little corner. So you could see that these corners are mats for here's the mat for the person, there's a mat for the sofa, and there's a mat for this other furniture. And so then the depth, how far behind the glass each of these 2D images can be defined because they're each on their own plane. And finally, all of that then gets projected into the window space. And so that as the camera moves, you get this perception of depth where this is just a 2D plane, but it looks like you're looking into a room. And yeah, so this is, periodically, whether it's the vendor themselves or sometimes Epic will actually work out an agreement with a vendor to say, all right, here, we're going to pay you this, and this is now free for all users. So this is a free download at this point. And one of the aspects of this might be a marketing freebie from this company, because this company sells libraries of the actual maps. So there's nothing preventing any of us from creating our own maps, but obviously there's a little bit of work involved. Like this is like, I should get Nuke going to make these and start making my own libraries. But of course, the company that makes this shader has for sale loads and loads of libraries of rooms and offices and such.
And 99% of the folks that see it will go, that's really cool. And then they'll use those rather than trying to build their own until they have someone who was specific. I remember watching the behind the scenes of Spider-Man. This is the 2002 with Tobey Maguire, of them talking about just going in and shooting sphericals of office buildings and then putting them on little boxes, just basically doing that kind of like what this is. This is way more advanced than that, but it is very close to something that we saw 20 years ago. And there was a whole bunch of us that looked at it because we had done a lot of different things, but there was like I didn't think of that. Like I didn't think of, I didn't think of when I did the Queen ship, we had a cockpit, and I just put a plane back there that just was there so that it moved, so that the people moved across. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon kind of moved across the windows as it went by, and it was so subtle that you probably didn't notice. Like there wasn't. It was, you only saw it. It was motion blurred and everything else. But we wanted to see. We paid attention to that. But this was they filled this, and they basically had a particle generator that just generated. Just attached all of those. Randomly go grab rooms and put them in the building, or within rooms within a group, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Next question.
Paul Wallace has a link here, and he says, how would you improve a drone video like this one?
So Paul's showing a fly through of a Tesla factory. What I would say is that's a really good thing for a drone. That would take a long time, much longer than it took to do the drone shot, to do it in Unreal. And it would be, you could probably do it all with Nanite, but that would be, a year or two of modeling to get all the things that are inside that factory into Unreal. And I would just say, hey, why don't we just do a drone shot? So you always want to use the tool for what it's good for. Next question.
Albie Lopez in San Antonio, Texas, up next. Since NEB any equipment that will be helpful for camera tracking when producing a virtual Unreal Engine production?
Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, so Vive released the Mars tracking system, which is a standalone unit that does genlock and time code, and has a complement of hardware that improves the accuracy of the Vive trackers, and it's around $5,000, I think, starting.
That's amazing.
So that seems like a really pretty cool little self-contained tracking system.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I was exactly going to jump on that. I think that's probably one of the greatest additions to the virtual production universe right now is, a broadcast grade camera tracking system tends to run in the plural tens of thousands of dollars. I think like starting prices are usually in the easily $20,000 to $30,000 range, if not more. I know one studio was getting a quote for tracking a single camera, and it was almost $80,000. This is $5,000, and it uses existing technology that has been out for consumers, and it's a standalone box, so it doesn't need to be connected to a computer. And so at $5,000, I mean, it's immediately dropped the cost of doing a moving camera shot in virtual production by, no kidding, a minimum of $25,000. You can combine that with, the virtual production shoot I did last week was not on an LED wall. LED walls are, plural hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they consume a lot of electricity. Like a decent size, let's say 20-foot by 10-foot LED wall would need a dozen to 2 dozen 20 amp power outlets in the US to drive it, and it's very, very hungry. Whereas I can actually achieve virtual production with a pair of laser projectors is what we used. So now, a pair of laser projectors and that hardware is in the $10,000 to $20,000 range. Add $5,000 for the this tracking, and now you don't need the motion tracking system. So when we were doing our virtual production last week, we were using a Vicon tracking system, but the advantage of this $5,000 system is you can synchronize its data. It's synchronized with the camera, and that same sync signal that synchronizes the Vive Mars can also synchronize your projection or your LED wall. So you get none of the interlacing artifacts that you might get if anything gets out of sync. So that's awesome. I can't wait to see how that
the funny thing is, for years we've taken the HTC, we've taken their controllers and just attached them to the camera, and we've done the same thing with the Oculus controllers. We would just sit there, put a little clamp on them, and just set them on the cameras, and then different games that we worked in that we were doing behind the scenes for we would just be able to drive the cameras. We'd get the game developers to build their cameras to match that up for us in focal length and everything else, and then we could move it around. And so that's been around for a long time, and they finally just made it something that you didn't have to buy an HTC, and it's the same, it's using the hand controllers with things, just they're in a nicer little package. I'm sure they're a little more accurate as well. So it's really exciting to get that.
Yeah. And this actually points to also that, like, this whole metaverse thing, I mean, it's the buzzword of the day, but the fact that all of these technologies work so well together, and they're all suddenly available at accessible prices. I mean, that's really the transformation here. I mean, it's, I think there's actually an article floating around somewhere that's, that time that, Vive accidentally released a consumer motion capture system, because you could really use the Vive hardware as a mini motion capture system. And again, these are things that traditionally cost tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in production, but now you can buy them from Amazon and have them on your doorstep the next day for a few hundred. It really puts powerful technology in the hands of just about anyone who wants to tell a story and do some production. So that I think is more the thing that's powerful about the metaverse.
And the thing to think about with the cameras now is that we're getting to the point where you can have a 3-camera shoot, and you're moving the cameras around. That's been the big thing, is we can't use virtual backgrounds, because if we move the cameras, they'll slide. And now you can potentially make that work. Next question.
Scott Joff in Jackson, Tennessee says, has there been any improvement Oh, I'm sorry. That was the wrong question. Douglas Carmichael has this one. Has there been any improvements to Mac support in Unreal Engine 5 versus Unreal Engine 4? And should I stick with Unity for Metaverse development on a Mac or move to Unreal Engine 5?
Go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say, if you're already using Unity, I would stick with it. I mean, move forward with what you have. Unity is making its own strides and is going to continue to develop. And so, I wouldn't leap from one to the other unless there was a specific feature in the other engine that you needed that the one you're using doesn't have.
I think that we may find that it's potentially that Unity is spending more energy on the metaverse than Unreal, in the sense that they seem to, Unreal's got a lot of games, they've got their fingers in a lot of things, and Unity went and bought Weta Digital, so it's there's a different view of how that works, and so, but I think that right now, a lot of us thought that Unity was kind of out of the picture for a while, and then after the lawsuit, all of us are kind of Epic's lawsuit with Apple. We just don't know where Apple's going. Like, are they going to do it all themselves? Are they going to partner with Unity? They're probably not going to partner with Unreal. And the great news for all of us as creators is that it's going to be even. I think that you could get into either one of these and you would be in a good place, whether it's Unity or Unreal. I think that in this area right now, from what we've seen so far, Unreal is ahead, but not nearly as much as it used to be, and I think that will, so I think that we're in a pretty good space as creators, that we have some diversity in the market. Next question.
And here's the one from Scott Joff that I was talking about, Jackson, Tennessee. He says, what's the best way to create an interactive AR or VR version of a building that has not been built yet?
I think that you could build it in Unreal and be able to wander around in it. So you'd be building some kind of level maker. You start with something that's going to let you build levels that let people walk around, and then put those objects into Unreal and make that work. I think that would be probably where I'd approach it. I would pay a lot of attention to WWDC this year, because we're going to see probably a lot of tools. I don't know anything about what's there, but what I do know is that Apple usually upgrades all of their interactive tools every June. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just wondering from Nick if there's some sort of a cross-pollination between the CAD that would certainly have been done for a building that's in design that hasn't been done yet, and the Unreal universe, so that you could bring in some of that data.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a tool built in or available for free from the marketplace for Unreal called Datasmith, and it's specifically a data translation tool for bringing in data from things like AutoCAD or other building information management systems. I had raised my hand also to answer this question, because there's also a derivative tool built using Unreal Engine called Twinmotion. It is a purpose-built architectural visualization tool. And so it has all of the visual capabilities of Unreal Engine, but it's packaged specifically for architects. So the terminology is more natural for anyone working on architectural or interior designs and such. And many of the toolkits needed to translate data directly from something like SketchUp or AutoCAD or other common tools in that area, all those translators are already built in. So it's a little bit smoother of a transition.
Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I was going to pretty much echo that same comment. I was going to suggest something like a SketchUp using Datasmith into Twinmotion, and then you can take that Twinmotion project and actually bring that into Unreal then, and use it for AR or VR or whatever you want. There is some limited VR capabilities in Twinmotion, not so much AR that I'm aware of, but it's mostly just like a 360 output type thing, not something you can actually walk around.
Yeah, and one thing I would say is to look at what Microsoft's doing with HoloLens. I think that Microsoft in the BIM area, in the visualization of buildings and construction sites and so on and so forth, Microsoft has actually taken the lead here. So look at some of the look for AES or BIM and HoloLens, because there's some incredible demos that I've seen with that combination. Next question.
Comes from Avi Lopez in San Antonio, Texas. I'm a little confused by it. It says, how has UA comparability to Mac M1 Pro chips? Maybe that's compatibility. Yeah. M1 Pro chips and up.
Nothing new. maybe worse. so we probably, it's probably not a great solution right now, right, Nick?
I don't know that it's worse. I think I've seen a number of folks running Unreal on an M1 and doing comparisons versus older platforms, but I don't believe that it is purpose built for optimized operation on an M1. And so I don't think there's any performance advantage to using Unreal on an M1 versus legacy Intel.
Yeah. Last question of the hour.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles gets the honor, and he says, with the release of trackers like the Vive Mars, if a Vive Mars, if a 3-camera shoot is not live, can we shoot it on green screen and add Unreal environments during post-production?
You could. A lot of times when we're shooting stuff for post, what we usually do is put tracking markers in there and then track it, because no matter how accurate the trackers are, they're rarely more accurate than tracking the actual surface of what's behind you. I don't know if Nick agrees or disagrees.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that, and that's what I did when I was working on feature films is this space. And so I think that if it were me, I would use that tracking data from on set as a starting point, because a lot of the better tracking software allows you to load in here's my first best guess. So you could pre-populate it or seed that data. And that helps the tracking software because it has a better starting point rather than this camera may be absolutely anywhere. So you could use and record that data. Unreal has built-in functionality for recording tracking data animations as it happens. And so you could record that data, export it as FBX, and then use it in tracking software. But the tracking software solution is going to get far more accuracy because it's really designed to do sophisticated image tracking analysis at the sub-pixel level. And so the degree to which the camera movement is really locked to what happened into how you want to put your CG environment into the scene is far, far, far more accurate than just taking the tracking data. And then you also have the issue of synchronizing that tracking data and, to be frame accurate. So there we go.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just wondered, for both Alex and Nick, is there any universal strategy for placement and number of trackers in order to maximize the useful information without overdoing things?
Nick?
Well, if you're a tracking artist and not a roto artist, there is no way to overdo the placing of the markers. If you're a roto artist, the tracking markers are always overdone. I think the rule of thumb generally is that you really need a minimum of, for most software, like half a dozen, 7 or so tracking markers dispersed throughout the 3-dimensional space. So it's not like put 7 tracking markers on the back wall and you're good to go, but you would need them dispersed in depth as well as vertical, as well as horizontal throughout the scene. And so coincidentally, that lines up with, how many sides and corners there are on a cube. And the more of those that you have interspersed through that space, the more accurate the track can be, because you're also solving that motion through a glass lens that distorts the imagery as the camera moves. And so the more of those points of reference that the software can have, the better it's able to calculate what exactly is the lens distortion involved and give you those results to use, as well as where is the camera and where are these points in 3D space. So always it's a tug of war between the folks that have to get rid of the tracking markers from the images and the people that use them to do the tracking.
Yeah, generally the rule of thumb, and Nick's actually tracked some that I've done. I don't know if Nick agrees with this or not, but as we started it, we had a shot we did for Nickelodeon long ago, and we had basically, and I made them very specific. So the edges, I made triangles. They look like the Pixscore logo a little bit, but they had three triangles with an inverted triangle, between them, so that it's space. So I have lots of little points to grab onto. Then each side was exactly a decimeter, so that you could measure it and I know what the scale is, by it. So if you just measured point to point, you knew that it was a decimeter, and then each one was a meter apart. And so the points, we'd measure them very carefully, and we basically used a laser to go across the green screen, and then we would move them exactly a meter apart. And the reason we did that was for scale, and we decided that about 3 feet was enough coverage for it, and I think we had pretty good coverage for it. And we made them green because we knew that we'd be able to, we wanted to make it as easy as we could to roto it. Given that I was the one that did it here's the funny thing is the two people that did the most roto was myself and Emery Wells. like a little history for you. Emery came out and helped composite that shot. So anyway, this is long before Frame.io, and so we put that together. But our keying worked pretty well. Very minor paint to do, and Nick did a great job. The track worked perfectly. Maybe I can dig out we might do a second hour where I dig that out and we reminisce about we
can prove our moves. I think that
exactly.
was the
I found it fascinating that you custom built the tracking markers. There is no such thing, I guess, as a standard. It's just up to each person.
Everybody has their own opinion about what the tracking markers should do. And I didn't like, some people just do black and white ones. Some do lots of little shapes. I found that we didn't do it with that green screen. With another screen, we actually built we had those printed. We finally did print them. We wanted to reproduce them, but we ended up just printing a couple of them and put magnets on them. And then we had little steel, we measured everything out carefully in the green screen and then inserted rare earth magnets into the green screen and spackled over them and then left them there. So you didn't see them, but we could literally, I have a video somewhere, but you could just throw the tracking marker at the screen and it would go, it would just snap to the screen. It was a great way to impress visual effects folks because no one had ever seen that, just being able to throw a tracking marker. You'd literally just throw it at the screen and it would just grab onto it and snap it into place. And it didn't damage the screen. The reason I did it was I didn't want to pin. What you end up doing is you end up sticking it to the screen and slowly you see little marks, where your things were. No matter what you use, you end up with little marks on your screen. I'm very touchy.
Yeah, I was going to
the marks.
Say that as tracker people, number one, you want to have some markers that exactly where they were on set. Three-dimensionally, I know where that was. So Alex was talking about that. I know Tim Daubert actually put together something like a little Medusa that had multiple laser pointers on it. And so after the DP and everybody was okay, they would rehearse the camera motion for a shot. And he'd be watching that and say, I just need one more mark or two more marks in this shadow. And he would just project, just aim these two laser beams into that. And that would be easy to roto because it would be a 2D track and it's just in a shadow, but it would just give him, just an extra couple things to hold on to. And it wasn't physical. So that that could just be pulled out, from shot to shot. So that was a really cool trick.
Yeah. I had threatened to make a kit out of that, out of my little triangles, and just one of those things, one of those products that just sat on the shelf thinking someday this would be a good idea. Anyway, thanks, Nick.
I wanted to mention that,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that you mentioned Emery. I noticed that Filmic Pro just announced camera to cloud for Frame.io yesterday.
Yeah. No, it's camera to cloud is going wide, and I think everybody's jumping on board. So we hope to do some stuff with camera to cloud soon. So stay tuned for that as well. Thanks, Nick, for coming in, talk about it. Rick, it was good to see you. So it was good to have you here. We hope when we do more 3D stuff, we snare you into at least Wednesdays. So it's good to have you here.
It's great to be here.
And thank you to the producers who asked all the great questions. Hopefully we'll get Nick on to do. I'd like to get Nick on as often as we can, and Rick to join us. So we'll talk about more. If you have things that you want Nick to talk about, throw them into the second hour suggestions, and we'll bring them in. And thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. Good conversation as always. And now we are going to jump into after hours. I try to do that slowly to give them more time so that they get the credits up faster. Kind of worked. We have to work on that a little bit more. We now need these to all be in 3D in the metaverse, flying through buildings, over seashores, but digital seashores, not real seashores. Digital Nags Head. Oh, we gotta go.